All right, good morning, everybody. It's 11 a.m. We are here for the August 15th meeting of the Assembly Enterprise Utility Oversight Committee, posted from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. And let's go ahead and start with member introductions.
George Martinez.
Mark Littlefield.
Christopher Constant.
I believe on the phone we have member Salt.
Randy Schultz here.
All right, thank you, Randy. Under today's business, we have two items, and then they both fall under the purview of AWU. So I'll ask you gentlemen to introduce yourselves and go ahead and get us started when you're ready.
Okay, Mark Corsentino, General Manager of Anchorage Water and Wastewater Utility.
Mark Schimsheimer, Director of Engineering at AWU.
James Armstrong. One more time. Just tap it and let it go. Yeah, you don't need to hold it. Yep.
Okay, thank you. James Armstrong, Project Manager at Anchorage Water and Wastewater Utility.
Okay, good morning, Assembly members. Today we're going to talk about two topics for AWU, one being the powder reserve amendments, if you will, and then the King Street fuel storage improvements that was on the Assembly meeting as an addendum item, but we pulled it with your help because we want to give you this presentation first. So Mark will talk about, Schimsheimer will talk about the powder reserve stuff, and then James will give a presentation on the King Street fuel stuff. But going to the next slide, kind of an overview, why are we here, Matthew? Let's skip the slide. Can you? There it is. Thank you. Okay, so what this slide shows you, there's two requests from today's meeting for each of these one request per topic. First one is we're requesting to repeal from 2017 Assembly resolutions based on the historical methane gas settlement agreement to reflect the amended methane gas settlement agreement that was done with the recently. And the second request is for construction approval of a King Street fuel storage project for about $4.75 million to reflect the current King Street Master Plan phasing project. And what I've shown on the slide too is we've been here before on the King Street Master Plan stuff and what it is. And there's just some historical presentations, one from 21 and one from 23. At a high level, I think it's important to note this is one of our major facilities at AWU. It's our operations and maintenance facility, our 24-hour emergency response facility. It's separate from our operations, our headquarters facility. So it's a really critical facility. And in 2018, we embarked on a master plan to do some improvements there because we were squeezed out of space. Our utilities grown from in the 70s and 80s from 20,000 customers to about 60,000 customers now. So we've stretched our space. We've got equipment crammed in there. I mean, we've gone through that before. We can always go through this and give more detail on what the purpose of that facility is and what it does. But point being is we've wanted to do upgrades. We had a master plan to do it. As a matter of fact, about 2 years ago, we bid a project to get more warm storage there because of all the critical needs of our equipment there, and it came in extremely high. So we had to reassess, and hence since then, one of the presentations we gave about a year ago is that we've done a BRIC grant request through both Senator Murkowski and Senator Sullivan, and that's still pending, and that'll help them go a long way to help facilitate this. So that we expect maybe later this year. So, but one of the things we could do, and we need to do now because of needs, is the fuel island upgrade, simply because we have other issues on that site that will help facilitate the future growth of that and appropriate growth, thoughtful growth of that facility at large. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the first topic. So in summary, there's two requests here. Sounds like we have a lot of time. Usually we're rushed. Two requests here. That's the main focus of this meeting. The first one will be powder reserve, and I'll turn it over to James to give that presentation. And you can use mine if you want. Oh.
Okay. Advance the slide if you could. Okay, Mark Schimsheimer, Engineering Director at AWU. And I've been working on the powder reserve project probably 7 or 8 years, and I've gone through all the different iterations of this with between AWU, the MOA, and including Inc. Today we're here to talk about, go back up, one down, there you go, stop. We're here to talk about a request that we're going to be putting forward to the Assembly via resolution to repeal two existing resolutions that are on the books today. This is a cleanup bookkeeping exercise, but there are some very tangible positive outcomes if we do it. Next slide. Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. So this resolution is from the board.
The resolution will come from us through the administration.
But this is from your board?
Oh, this one right here? No, this is a draft. I wouldn't get too hung up on it. We'll clean this up in the proper format through the assembly and the administration. What you could focus on, if anything, is just the language you'll see. It'll be in the right template later. But no, to your point, Chris, we have not gone to our board on this, although they're very well aware and averse to this topic as well.
Okay, so because the format made me think
Yes,
somebody
that's right.
somewhere approved it. So the second question is, can you provide for us when the resolution comes forward an AIM with a statement from Eklutna that just provides their position on the change?
We certainly can. We'll work with that. They've signed the agreement, but at the end of the day, if you want additional stuff, that makes sense. I don't think there's any objection to that.
Email communication
Fair
from
enough.
them that states we're in support of
Okay.
the repeal of this document. It could be 2 lines, and then just an AIM document, which is a cover letter to the assembly that
Okay,
shows us that they are also in agreement, because it's 2 parties here.
I understand.
Correct. Okay. A little bit of history here. The methane gas settlement agreement was executed between the parties in 2017. It obviously had requirements of the parties. Eklutna Inc. had requirements for certain build out. AWU had requirements to furnish a significant amount of infrastructure. But it was left a little bit open as to how this would all come together and who would pay for what exactly. And then there was a lot of different triggering events that the parties would go through, and go, no go decision points were made. Next slide. During that time, there was a question about how to move forward with the AWU infrastructure. And the method that was chosen, universally chosen, was to create improvement districts, one for sewer, one for water. Normally, improvement districts are generated by the community. The community people get together and they form an improvement district, and the assembly approves it. In this case, the assembly took the initiative to create resolutions requiring AWU to petition for improvement districts. We did not create them, we were to petition for them. And the petitioners would be Eklutna Inc. and the surrounding landowners that would be the affected parties. And if you look at the maps here, with regards to water, which would be a transmission main, we were going to impact a significant number of folks in the South Birchwood area. Generally, they were opposed to this, but Eklutna Inc. is a 51% landowner of this improvement district. So by their sole vote, they could have made this happen. They didn't like that position because they felt the community needed a bigger say, but just by the numbers, that's where it came out. Next slide. So between 2017 and 2023, the parties, and that is AWU, MOA, and Eklutna Inc., and MOA was involved at this because prior to this time, it was fairly contentious. We managed to bring the temperature of this project down and just get into some, rational conversations and negotiations. The way that we were going to execute the improvement districts was through a tariff compliant vehicle called an Infrastructure Coordination Agreement, an ICA. We recently used an ICA very successfully on the Sand Hills project in South Anchorage. That's the same vehicle. And that was the intent here, is we would use this as a way to create a partnership between the AWU and the developer, which was Eklutna Inc. Unfortunately, and it took several years of negotiation, and it was all done in good faith and best efforts by the parties, we could not reach commercial terms. And while we were doing this, the cost of the project started to balloon. We've all seen the construction inflation. In 2017, that just started. When we finally got hot and heavy into negotiations, we couldn't keep up with the price increases. And the repayment schedule, which we're looking at, and we're talking in the $20 to $40 million range, it became critical that we had repayment schedules and obligations because neither party could be left without some assurances. We could not agree on a repayment schedule. We couldn't agree on a build-out schedule. At the time, Eklutna Inc. Was looking at this project and seeing diminishing returns from build-out. And I know that in just talking to them as a developer. And then the community, specifically the South Birchwood community, was very concerned. They weren't concerned about Powder Reserve being built. They were concerned about the impact to their community, and there would be an impact to their community. So things were working against this project from an economic standpoint. We routinely rescoped this project in Powder Reserve proper, and we made it smaller and smaller and smaller. But the price didn't seem to go down because as you made the project smaller, inflation just killed you. Again, we ran into repayment issues, and between the parties, or actually Eklutna Inc., we met with their board several times. They were unwilling to move forward with the project because of their own financial analysis that it just wouldn't work for them. We worked with them as much as we could until the point came when this just isn't going to happen. At the same time that we were doing these negotiations, Eklutna Inc. was purchasing land from the railroad. And so they had a parcel to the south of Powder Reserve, and they expanded this parcel through, I believe, 2 separate purchases to make a very attractive piece of land down there. And we called it Powder Reserve West. It was just to the southwest of the main parcel. And acreage-wise, it's about the same size. And the build-out would be similar in nature. So not only did we finalize and then walk away from the rescoping of Powder Reserve, Eklutna Inc. moved to a new site, and we moved with them. So next slide. One fly in the ointment that was always out there was that the original methane gas settlement agreement put what I would call onerous terms on the parties. It was difficult for anybody to either understand their obligations, and once we did, the parties just couldn't get there. So we always contemplated that we needed to amend the agreement in such a way that the parties could both succeed. And in 2023, we did that. There was a negotiation by both parties who fundamentally wanted to see this happen. And what we did is we struck out of the original agreement many of the terms that we found to be, well, first of all, proprietary to Powder Reserve proper and onerous to both parties. And what came out of that was the obligations for AWU to build both a large transmission main and a trunk improvement and lift station in now what would be a parcel that they were not going to build on. So we removed a lot of those obligations. In fact, we removed all those obligations. There were other obligations that were removed. There was monies that were moved around that were held in escrow. There was what was considered to be cleanup, and both parties executed an agreement that I think is going to serve us both well, quite frankly. And it was done in a very cordial, cooperative manner. And where it left this is that we will not be building a transmission main. We will not be expanding trunk, and we won't be doing large sewer lift stations, all of which aren't needed. We will do other activities I'll show in the subsequent slide, and Eklutna will develop Powder Reserve West using a standard development practice of private development, which is done every day. Next slide. So moving forward. Again, we're requesting, and we will draft up a resolution with the appropriate documentation to rescind the obligations of the parties in keeping with what the parties have already agreed to in the amendment to the methane gas settlement agreement. And instead, what we are going to do is we are mutually working forward towards creating a successful project in the Powder Reserve West area. And we've been working with them on master plans. It looks like it's 1,400 units plus or minus. Their master planning effort is going along quite well. From my opinion, it's going to be a very nice development. And it makes a lot of sense, both from an economic standpoint and just community needs, military needs, housing needs, and it just seems to make more sense. One thing that we've done, we at AWU, is we have pursued federal grant dollars through the offices of Senator Murkowski, who is a champion of the congressionally directed spending program, and we have secured a federal grant. And the next slide will show you what's going on there. One of the advantages of this federal grant is that we are relieving the developer of almost all off-site responsibilities. So they are responsible on-site, we are responsible off-site. It's a very clear delineation of responsibilities, and it works really well for the parties. Next slide. So this is what we have agreed to, and what you see there is on a very large foam board someplace on the 8th floor right now, which is the fundamental agreement between the parties of what we will do with our grant dollars to facilitate the development. So the CDS Powder Reserve West grant scope, it is already funded in the federal budget for FY23, meaning it's a done deal. We don't have the money yet because money moves pretty slowly out of DC. It does go through the EPA, and this is a new program, so they're having a little bit of trouble on their side, but we're working with them, and we should see the money show up here somewhat shortly. It is for sewer only. We will try to pursue water money, but water is not really our problem because water is at the property line in sufficient quantities to build this thing out either in its entirety or pretty close to it. And since the master plan is still dynamic, we couldn't say with certainty, what's going to happen here, but that's not our immediate concern. Our grant is at $4.5 million dedicated to this project. There's a 20% match contribution by AWU, and there's some justification because we have downstream capacity issues existing today that this grant will help alleviate. And so you can't see it in this diagram, but we have different phases of what we're going to do for upsizing of pipes for flow. We have pump stations that we will reconfigure and rebuild for cycle time. We have certain bottlenecks that we have identified that this money will use to de-bottleneck, and all of this will happen at the expense of the grant, AWU, but not of the developer. And so they're pretty happy with this, and this is one of the drivers that got them to change the methane gas settlement agreement. And our last thing is that this is probably going to be a scope of work delivered by the PMO, which you'll hear about more into the future. It's a yet to be established project management office that we intend to use to deliver most of the grant obligations. Grant obligations obviously have federal restrictions to them that you have to be keenly aware of and put yourself in alignment with. And I believe that's next slide. Is there? And that's the end of that part of the presentation. Questions, or we turn it over to James?
Yeah, I have a couple questions, and I see one from Member Littlefield as well. First off, you mentioned a 20% match. That'll be a little under $1 million. Have you guys identified where those funds are coming from?
Well, a couple of things. I think part of that is we want to see the final grant language, but a lot of the work that's already been done will be eligible for that matching grant. And so that's really the hope, because we have to be very careful. at AWU because we can't forward fund development without repayment. So through our tariff, this whole concepts, even from the original methane gas settlement agreement, the ICAs, we're severely restricted on expansion. And so we really have to focus on, unless it's grant dollars. Now the matchings become a challenge. There's room to justify those with little wiggle room, but part of this is both the amount of money that Clute has already spent and our coordination efforts could be eligible for that match. So the short answer is yes, we have that identified.
Okay, thanks. And then, we are expecting to take action on repealing these two ARs. Will there be some future assembly action that will be necessary for authorization for the project moving forward?
The short answer is probably not, other than when we actually receive the grant, we have to go to the assembly because that's not under appropriation right now. As a matter of fact, last year's budget and even this year's budget doesn't have it yet in there simply because we haven't seen the dollars show up yet. So you'll see it in that vein when and if that, well, it's not if, it will show up.
You will see it several times, I think. You'll see it when you accept the grant dollars. You'll see it when the PMO contract is let. You will see it when the construction contract for the work is out there. And you may see it one other time. So you've got about 3 or 4 different approvals coming up at different stages.
And when are you anticipating starting work?
This is going to be 2026.
Thanks.
And that is not, and we worked with the developer on their build out schedule.
Yeah, I was gonna say
So
that.
nothing we're doing is impacting their build out schedule. This is work that is intended. We could probably by all rights put this off for years. But since we have the money, we're going to do it, and we're not going to get in the way of a developer. But we're pretty far ahead of the curve on this one.
And then I'll put you in the queue. Then last question I have, you mentioned that this will have some improvements to infrastructure further downstream.
Yep.
Will this open up opportunities for development outside of just Powder River
Potentially, it
West?
depends. I mean, depends on what the landowners in the area have available. But yes, it would. The intent is to expand for future downstream development. But it really depends on the existing landowners. And I don't know if you've done any due diligence on that.
Powder Reserve proper will probably be a beneficiary of this
Yes,
at
that's
some
right.
point.
Okay, thank you. And Member Littlefield?
Thank you. I just have a quick question, and you may not have the answer, but I know Powder Reserve didn't have 1,400 units. Do you recall what the reserve?
It was around 11 to
So
1,200.
this is an increase. I figured it was an increase, and it's good. And it's really good to see that the dead ends in Powder View and Powder Ridge are going to finally continue to be built out. I'm glad to see it. Thank you.
I can't speak on behalf of the developer, but I would take numbers like 1,400 and 1,100 with a grain of salt. But we're talking 1,000 plus units easily. Yes.
Yep. Thank you.
Thanks. So I think, Mark, you just suggested that this project, we're ahead of the curve, but I have to put it in context. We're being asked to repeal resolutions from 2017. And so it's hard for me to square that we are ahead of schedule if we're thinking that this is the follow-on project of the policy that was set in 2017. And so help me understand how we're ahead of the curve.
Let me take a stab at that. Let's clarify. To understand your question, I think what we're suggesting, I don't remember exactly what Mark said, but I think the policies from 2017 were dictated on a different project altogether. And since that project is not tied to a methane gas settlement agreement, for instance, and because that methane gas settlement agreement changed, those policies are unreflective of the reality today. Do we have to repeal them? No.
That's not what I'm talking about.
Okay.
I'm in context.
Okay.
This is all part of the conversation about getting to yes on the Powder Reserve.
Yeah. So I think, let me clarify then on the other portion that I did here. We're ahead of the curve in the fact that we do need to do this the downstream capacity upgrades. They're not going to develop it fast enough that we'll be slowing them down. In other words, they're only going to get maybe a dozen or so houses per year. I don't know what it is. If they get 1,000 houses right off the bat, then we're behind the curve. But I don't think they're going to do that right away. So that's why what he said, we're ahead of the curve in the respect that we won't impact their upstream development because we have the downstream capacity now for a couple housing developments, but not for 1,000.
Now, I understand now the project, in my opinion, is years behind. But what
Fair
you're
enough.
saying is
Yes.
that in the context of how things are developing, this line, the system that's being developed is ahead of the development curve.
Correct.
Because once they get everything settled and entitled and then start building.
They
it's
can
gonna
start
take-
building without us in the way. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. I don't see anyone else, so let's dive into King Street.
So once again, I'm James Armstrong. I'm the project manager for the King Street campus. The King Street fuel storage improvements is one of several projects in which I'm the project manager for at King Street. This is the first one that has come to fruition as far as getting ready to build it. And I'll discuss a little bit more here. So next slide. So, being forward-thinking and forward-looking, the utility put together in 2018 a master plan to prioritize and plan large projects. The fuel island is one of several that are listed here. And what we have shown on this slide are the estimations at completion, so total project costs, which include the construction. The fuel island is being asked to be approved on the next assembly meeting for the construction portions of the cost. There are other costs associated with the project that add to the totals that you see there. Further on, we have warm storage that Mark alluded to in previous slides. We have septage and grit improvements. We have fats, oils, and grease receiving station. And our admin building is in desperate need of remodel due to leaks and aging mechanical equipment. Because this facility has been operating for so long, our needs have been expanding during that period of time, and we're, trying to catch up and make those improvements to help O&M operate efficiently. Next slide. So the project that I'm here to talk about today is the fueling island and the backup power improvements that are associated with this. So recently, as far as last year, I think we had a major power outage in the area, and the King Street campus did not have backup power. And so this project is vital to ensure our continued operation during major events. We know during the 2018 earthquake that we had issues with delivering fuel to generators to make sure that our lift stations were operational. This fueling island and the tanks and the capacity there helps solve some of that. The generation helps the facility run during major, catastrophes. And so this project is vital to the operations of the facility. So in 2024, this project is going to bring in, it's going to go from 2 unleaded fuel pumps. We're going to maintain those 2, but we're going to increase it by 1 fuel pump, and we're going to add high flow capacity so that we're not holding operators back from filling up their trucks. Our trucks have very large fuel capacities, and the current flow that we see day to day in our own vehicles limits the trucks on their fueling capacity. We have operators sitting around for 15 minutes waiting for their vehicles to fill up. This cuts down that time. Also, our portable tanks that we use to fill up our remote stations. So the high flow capacity is a very much needed improvement. We have 1 unleaded 12,000 gallon tank, so that's an improvement of 2,000 gallons of storage. And we have 2 diesel 12,000 gallon tanks, so that's more than doubling our capacity there now. And we have a new storm drain system, the generator I talked about. And we also are taking care of some of the contamination that is located on site. We had a vendor accidentally spill some fuel in the area, and we're going to clean up some of that stuff, the contamination. Next slide. So along with this project, there are some special conditions. One of them is the community workforce agreement, because this project was estimated prior to bidding to be above the threshold for community workforce agreement. It was included in the bid documents. So it is now a part of the contract requirements, and we're moving forward with that. And the contractor is responsible for finalizing the agreement, making the contracts that he is working with and the contractor he's working with comply with the requirements of the CWA. The next item is contaminated soil. So we always want to go in this planning. So we have a contaminated soil and water handling plan that the contractor is to follow. and we have bid items in there to handle the disposal and proper treatment of those, the contaminated soil. And so, being that our operations and maintenance facility is a very critical asset to the utility, we are requiring some, speedy construction so we limit the fuel outage and availability. We do have plans for our operators to fuel off-site, but as we learned in the 2018 earthquake, those off-site facilities may not be available to our guys, and therefore we're going to limit it as much as possible during construction. That is all I have. So questions?
I guess two pretty straightforward questions. So I see 2024 project, the expectation is the work will be done this year?
No, the expectation is to award the contract and start submittal review. Due to long lead items, the generator is out close to 6 to 8 months. The pre-engineered metal building is out 3 to 4 months. There's some other long lead items as far as the fueling system and the logic controls, but they're a little bit shorter than that. The intention was to award it this fall, hopefully get the groundwork done. But due to constraints of, bidding and some questions received and modifications that were needed in the award process, it's extended it out too far to get that earthwork done this year. And so, and along with the long lead items. So we're planning on hitting it full steam ahead, probably starting in April. We'll have submittals reviewed and approved this fall, so those long lead items can be ordered and they'll be on the ground or in ship, in process of getting here, so that we're ready to, hit the ground running.
And the combined cost for these projects, we're looking around $7 million. Is that?
I'm sorry, restate the question.
So that's the bid you saw was the award for that you saw that was on item 10C2 that was on the last meeting. It'll be carried to the next one. The construction award only is $4.75 million. But the total, remember, that's just the construction component. The total project cost, meaning engineering, planning, everything, close out, all that kind of stuff. The total project cost that we see to the utility is, which will go in our books, will be $7 million approximately. And that's an estimate too. EAC is an estimate at completion. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Member Constant has a question. I also just want to note for the record that Member Volin joined us at 12:29.
And Ms. Braga as well, like about half an hour ago. So looking at this slide, the master plan date is 2018. What is EAC?
Estimate at completion.
Okay. And we have here $83.5 million of projects listed. And so if this was set up in 2018, what's the status of this?
Well, yeah, good
how are we
question.
funding it?
Yeah. So this is the.
Yeah.
The master plan was done in 2018, and the estimated completions are about a third of that back then. This is current date estimates for what it will take. And as far as phasing, we're continuing to work on that. As a matter of fact, what you saw on the first or second slide is we've put in a $35 million brick grant request to help with some of this stuff. So we're hoping we can get that, because building resiliency and emergency type stuff is what that grant's for. Or, if we don't get it, we'll have to reassess and maybe scale back further. We don't know. But yes, it's a large cost, but it's what's necessary to keep things operational.
So is this all of the work called out in the master plan?
Generally speaking, I mean,
I got two responses here.
So, sorry, Mark, I responded non-verbally. So there are a bunch of smaller projects that are identified in the master plan to get a full, read of it. We can make it available, but basically there's lighting, there's like site lighting, but it's not really worth mentioning in this when we're talking about big dollars.
So then, is any of the work already completed? Or is this the first foray into achieving this work?
Some of the septage work has been done. That's about it. We upgraded the septic station the last 2 years. But other than that, no, most of this has not been done yet.
And so what I heard you say, Mark, the finance plan, there's in part a grant we're seeking.
Yep.
And then if we don't get that grant, then plan B is to relook at the projects and then come up with an efficiency approach.
Yep.
And CDS.
And I'll be honest, one of the concepts here, depending on how this goes, especially with the brick grant, one of the things we've dreamed about that's part of the, whether it's part of this master plan or just as other initiatives we put together is, especially we learned this after the earthquake in 2018. This is really the focus of all the work that gets done in emergency response. And in 2018, fortunately, we still had communications and power pretty quickly after that earthquake, but this is our emergency operations center too. And so what we want to do is consolidate. We talked about this in 2021 in the presentation. One of the objectives is to consolidate this facility, meaning move our main admin building at 3,000 here and open up the admin building. We'd sell it, open the market, and then use that money for equity to help fund other stuff. And we still want to do that, but it depends on whether or not we get the brick grant. If we don't get that, we don't necessarily need to consolidate office space. There's an economies of scales, collaboration improvements if we can do that. But if that's too cost prohibitive, then that's X'd out, and we would still do the warm storage because that is absolutely necessary to do. So that's the kind of stuff we're still waiting to see.
Right. So, and just on balance, you have liabilities on Arctic. It is a liability. Then you consolidate, you remove the liability. The 20 million there for admin building remodel would encompass the.
To some degree, yeah.
transfer.
There's some improvements that have to be done. The roof, for instance, leaks. One of the things too at this facility that we're hoping to do as part of this is kind of have this as our lead facility too. Right now, we actually across the street, we have a pressure regulating valve that has a turbine in there. So we have this facility now doesn't pay for electricity for the most part because we put a feed in across. So we generate power out of one of our water facilities to feed this. This is a prime location. It gets good sun. You could get solar panels on there. So there's a lot of other grant opportunities, even on the efficiency side we're looking at here. But to do any of that stuff, the roof is falling apart already. So we don't want to put solar panels on a roof that's falling apart. The siding's falling apart. It's an older facility. So it needs improvements no matter what. The HVAC, the admin building, we may not need to make all the office space improvements if we don't consolidate, but there's still going to be some improvements to some degree. And the $20 million seems absurd to just do rehab upgrades, but I just don't know what dollars look like in the next few years based on the escalation we've seen in the last few years. So,
Right. So lead, you mean LEED, not LEAD?
yes.
And so just for context in the conversations before we suckered this guy into taking over Anchorage Hydropower, as well as AWU, one of the conversations I am hoping we take on as a muni, which this will start on the 8th floor, but is to use some of the efforts of the Anchorage Hydropower efforts equals maybe some of the money, some of the staffing, and change the scope of our utilities. These are big, long conversations. Maybe unify the utilities under an umbrella and then take some of the revenues from our utility out there, Anchorage Hydropower in particular, and invest in muni-wide energy upgrades to our system, improvements that make our buildings more LED, more resilient, more. And so it's an early phase conversation. I'm just putting it out there so members hear it and understand some of the conversations that have happened.
Well, to your point, Chris, even when we did this back in 2018, that was, I think, around the same time we were looking at the stormwater utility, right? And so we contemplated this part of this expansion, this campus, is to potentially house some resources. I mean, the Muni has, watershed management and PM&E and other groups that already do stormwater management, infrastructure type stuff. But if there's ever a consolidation to put it under one group, if you will, this would allow that to some degree as well. So we contemplated that when we did some of these expansion upgrades. Some of them just have to happen as we stand together now. But to your point, yes, it brings up other opportunities as well.
That's it. I just wanted to share with members some of the strategic thinking that's going on.
Thank you. Anyone else? I think that's everything you gentlemen had, correct? A bit ahead of schedule. Is there anyone here for audience participation? Doesn't look like it. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and wrap up early and adjourn the meeting before our next work session. Thank you.
Back at noon for the Budget and Finance Committee.